I'm Amy Parker, 42, and I built a 20-year military career from the ground up, no shortcuts, no handouts. For years, I supported my parents financially, handled their bills, even made them my official dependents. But when my father tossed my Distinguished Service Medal in the trash and said, "These don't pay the bills," I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been dismissed by the very people you sacrificed everything for? If you have, drop your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw a hard line to protect your peace, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about taking your power back. Because what happened next caught everyone off guard. I grew up in a small town where the grocery store doubled as the post office, and your name meant more than your resume. My parents had a rule for everything: how to speak, how to sit, how to fold your clothes like you respected the fabric. My father served 4 years in the reserves before I was born. He never saw combat, but you wouldn't have known that from how he carried himself. There was always a sense that we were supposed to be grateful to live in his house. My mother worked the graveyard shift at the hospital laundry and slept most of the day. Between the two of them, there wasn't a lot of softness to go around. I was their only child. Not because they didn't want more, but because they couldn't afford them. That was the line anyway. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. I understood early that survival came from keeping your head down and your hands busy. I did well in school, not out of curiosity, but obligation. I kept my room clean. Didn't ask for things. Learned how to do my own laundry by the time I was 9. When my friends started getting jobs in high school, I already had 2. I stocked shelves before class and waitressed weekends. The goal was always the same: don't be a burden. The military wasn't some childhood dream. It was a calculation. I got the recruiter's card from a bulletin board outside the guidance office. I didn't tell anyone until after I passed the physical. When I finally sat them down at the kitchen table and told them I'd enlisted, my father nodded once and said, "Smart. You'll never go hungry." My mother didn't say anything. Just stood up, poured herself another cup of coffee, and went back to folding laundry. Basic was easier than I expected. Not because it wasn't hard, but because I was used to being invisible. Following orders. Keeping quiet. I wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but I was consistent. And consistency gets noticed. I made E for quicker than most. Didn't spend my first paycheck on a tattoo or a new phone. I sent half of it home. My parents didn't thank me. But 2 weeks later, I got a photo of their new water heater attached to a text that just said "done." I deployed twice before I turned 23. The first time, I sent money for their overdue property taxes. The second time, they needed a new roof. Each time, I offered before they asked. It became routine. I got in the habit of checking their zip code for weather reports before I checked mine. When they couldn't figure out their tax return, they called me. When their car broke down, I wired the difference. I was stationed across the world, but I still handled their DMV appointments, health insurance, overdue bills. I was their daughter, but functionally, I was their administrator. When I made staff sergeant, I mailed home a photo of the pinning ceremony. No one responded. I followed up a week later to check if it arrived. My mother said, "Yeah, I think your dad left it on the counter. I'll go check." Then she started telling me about the neighbor's dog. They never came to my commissioning. Didn't ask when it was. I didn't push it. I understood that flying across the country would have been expensive, complicated. But then I saw a Facebook post 2 months later, my father at a cousin's wedding in Arizona. They'd made the trip without telling me. The same week, I had walked across a stage in full dress uniform, shaking hands with a general. I told myself not to take it personally. They weren't sentimental. Never had been. I rationalized the silence as a form of respect. Maybe they thought I didn't need praise. Maybe they were proud in their own way. But over time, the excuses started wearing thin. They'd never once visited me on base. When I sent them framed medals or commendations, they ended up buried in the guest room closet. But when their furnace gave out in the middle of a cold snap, I was the first number they dialed. And I always picked up. I paid off their car loan the year I turned 29. They didn't know I was doing it until the final bill disappeared. I got a voicemail 2 days later. My father said, "I guess we're square now." I didn't know what he meant. Square for what? For being their daughter? For the years I showed up when they didn't? Still, I told myself that was just how they were raised. Prideful. Walled off. I figured my job wasn't to be thanked, it was to hold the line. Keep them afloat. There was something noble in it, I thought. Something dignified about doing the work, even if no one saw it. The turning point came slowly. Not one big event, but small moments that added up. I started realizing that every interaction we had came with an ask. Money. Favors. Paperwork. When I called just to talk, they were distracted. Disinterested. But when their Medicare got denied or their neighbor's kid parked too close to their driveway, they remembered my number. I was useful. But never celebrated. Never really seen. I had a friend on base whose parents sent care packages every month. Little things, snacks, books, handwritten notes. I watched her open them like it was Christmas. I never told her I hadn't gotten a letter from home since my first deployment. She didn't ask, and I didn't offer. When I turned 32, I got promoted again. The ceremony was small, nothing fancy. Afterward, we went out for beers. Someone asked what my family thought. I said, they don't really keep up with that stuff. No one pressed. I think they understood. Around that time, my commanding officer pulled me aside. Asked if I'd thought about retirement planning, beneficiary designations. I'd always had my parents listed by default, for the pension, the insurance. I said I'd look into it. That night, I opened my file and stared at the names on the screen. My father. My mother. Listed under primary dependents. I hadn't changed it in over a decade. I thought about everything they never said. The visits they never made. The calls they skipped. The medals they never asked about. I thought about the photo of my commissioning, still wrapped in the envelope I'd mailed it in, stuffed behind a box of garage tools the last time I visited. I didn't change the designation that night. But I didn't close the tab either. I left it open. Let it sit there, waiting. Something about seeing it laid out that clearly made everything else harder to ignore. The next time they called, it was about a bill. Not even their own, my uncle needed help. I said I'd think about it. Then I didn't follow up. They didn't notice the silence. Not right away. But I did. And that silence was the first thing in years that felt like mine. After I hit my 20-year mark, everything on paper looked stable. I was promoted again. Got another medal, the kind you don't apply for. The kind that means something. I remember calling home the next day. I figured, if nothing else, they'd at least want to know. My father answered. I told him the news, kept it short. He paused, then said, "That's good." Then he started talking about his heating bill. Said rates had gone up again and maybe I could look into what kind of support veterans' families are entitled to. I didn't correct him. I just said I'd check. That call stuck with me longer than I expected. It wasn't the first time they brushed off a milestone. But something about that timing, how quickly the subject changed, made it feel deliberate. Like I wasn't actually telling them something, I was reporting in. A few weeks later, I flew home for a long weekend. I hadn't been back in almost a year. They'd gotten older. My mom moved slower. My dad had a cane now. He didn't mention it. Just kept it next to his chair like it had always been there. I brought the medal with me. I didn't say anything about it. Just packed it in my carry-on and figured if the moment felt right, I'd show them. But the moment never came. The house was cluttered. Same furniture, same yellow walls. A few new faces, though. My cousin James had moved in after losing his job. He took over my old room. Said it was temporary, but no one seemed in a rush to change that. He was polite enough. At first. Dinner that Friday was a little tense. James talked a lot about politics, the cost of living, how real jobs were hard to come by now. At one point, my mom mentioned that I'd just gotten back from a rotation. James raised his eyebrows and said, "Still doing that army thing?" I smiled. Said it's been more than just a thing for a while now. He nodded like he understood, but I could tell he didn't. Later that night, I heard him talking on the phone in the kitchen. He thought I was asleep. He said, "Yeah, she acts like she's better than everyone. All those ribbons and stripes, who even cares?" He laughed. I didn't say anything. Didn't bring it up. I just stayed in the guest room and tried to fall asleep. The next morning, My mom asked me to take a look at their insurance paperwork. Said something about Medicare not covering what it used to. I sat at the table for 2 hours sorting through half-opened envelopes and expired letters. My dad sat across from me, eating toast and listing out the things that needed fixing around the house. The garage door stuck. The fridge made a sound. Their car, it's probably time for a hybrid. No one asked how I was doing. No one mentioned the metal. I left it in my suitcase. That visit ended like most of them did. A hug that felt obligatory. A promise to keep in touch better this time. And a quiet drive back to the airport, watching neighborhoods turn into highways and trying to figure out when I'd started dreading these trips. Back on base, I dove into work. That was always the pattern. When family got too heavy, I buried myself in structure. Missions. Training. Anything that gave me a clear set of expectations and outcomes. But the calls kept coming. They needed help with property taxes again. James's job interviews weren't panning out, so they were short on groceries. My father said something about how pensions were meant to support the whole family. I almost laughed. When I reminded him that they were already listed as dependents, he said, "Well, it's not like you've got kids or anything." That part stung more than I expected. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they framed it, like everything I had was theirs by default. Like the years I'd given, the things I'd earned, were just down payments on some ongoing obligation. I tried pulling back. Just a little. Took longer to return calls. Started saying, "Let me check," instead of, "I'll take care of it." But they noticed. My mother left a message one night that said, "You know, we've always supported you in our own way." Their version of support was silence. Mine was wiring money and handling logistics. But I didn't say that out loud. I just stared at the message, let it sit there for a while, then deleted it. I started to see the pattern more clearly. Every time I achieved something, another award, another assignment, they shrank from it. Changed the subject. Redirected the spotlight back to whatever they needed fixed. And when I didn't lead with usefulness, I didn't get a response at all. There was a brief moment where I considered asking them directly, "Do you resent me?" But I knew how that would go. My father would say I was being dramatic. My mother would sigh and say something about how things were different back then. They never asked to see the base. Never asked to visit. Not once. But when a hurricane rolled through their town and knocked out the power, I was the first person they called. James's voice came through the phone that time. He said, "Hey, can you help cover a generator? We found one on Craigslist, but the guy wants cash." I wired the money that afternoon. 2 weeks later, I saw James post about a new tattoo. It wasn't about the money. It was about the story behind it. The assumption that I wouldn't ask. That I didn't deserve an explanation. I tried talking to a colleague about it, someone I trusted. She said, "People like that get real comfortable taking. And they don't stop until you make them." That stuck with me. Because I'd never made them stop. I started reviewing my benefits paperwork again. Dug into the fine print. Talked to a finance officer about dependent status, disbursements, allocations. Just research, I told myself. Just information. But the more I read, the more I realized how deep the ties ran. How many strings were attached to the things I'd signed years ago. And how little I'd ever questioned any of it. I thought about the medals in my desk drawer. The certificates I stopped sending. The fact that my own parents had never once asked to see me in uniform. It didn't hurt exactly. But it was beginning to feel clear. And once you see something clearly, it's hard to unsee it. I came home on leave the week after I received the Distinguished Service Medal. It wasn't something I expected. Most people don't. You don't work for medals. You work because it's your job and because the people next to you are counting on you. Still, when the CO read my name out loud, there was this small, private feeling in my chest, like, for once, the system noticed. I had it framed before I flew out. The citation, the medal, the command seal at the bottom. I didn't tell them over the phone. I figured I'd surprise them. Maybe part of me still thought there'd be a reaction worth seeing in person. When I landed, my mother was late picking me up. Said traffic was worse than usual. We didn't talk much on the drive. She asked about the weather on base. I asked how the car was holding up. She said it probably needed a new battery. I said I'd take a look. The house looked the same, only dimmer. More cluttered than I remembered. Mail stacked on the kitchen table. A laundry basket in the living room. James was still there. He nodded at me from the recliner and didn't pause the TV. I walked down the hallway to the guest room and put my bag on the bed. The framed metal was still wrapped in the store's paper, tucked carefully between 2 layers of clothing. I waited until the next morning to bring it out. Set it gently on the hallway sideboard. Nothing dramatic. Just in plain view. A quiet offering. I didn't say anything. I figured if it meant anything to them, they'd say something first. They didn't. By the end of the second day, it was still sitting there, untouched. No one asked about it. No one moved it. I found myself checking to see if they'd at least looked at it. The plastic on the corners hadn't even been peeled off. I spent that afternoon fixing their leaky sink. Crawled under the cabinet, tightened what I could. My father walked by once to ask if I needed anything. I said no. He went back to his chair. That night at dinner, James made a joke about retirement benefits and how I'd probably be set for life. My father smirked. Yeah, well, as long as she keeps sharing it with the people who raised her, I guess it's a win-win. I didn't respond. Just cut my food and nodded. The next morning, I couldn't find the frame. The sideboard was clear. At first, I thought maybe my mom had moved it somewhere safe. I checked the kitchen, the living room. Nothing. I finally went out to the garage to grab a wrench. I was going to check on the car battery like I said. That's when I saw it. The frame, still wrapped, face down in the trash bin. Not the main bin either. The one they used for broken tools, rags, old junk. Underneath it were 2 more, my Army commendation from 2012 and a certificate from when I completed instructor school. All of them dumped together like expired coupons. I stood there for a second. No anger. Just this strange quiet. Then I reached in, pulled them out, and brushed the dust off the glass with the sleeve of my jacket. The corner of the Distinguished Service frame had cracked. Nothing sharp, just a clean diagonal fracture across the plastic. I turned around and found my father standing in the doorway. He didn't flinch. Just looked down at the frames in my hand and said, "Those don't pay the bills." I didn't answer. He added, "Maybe if you brought something useful home for once." I nodded. Walked past him without a word. Put the frames back in my bag, zipped it shut, and slid it under the bed. That night, at dinner, no one mentioned it. No one asked why I was quiet. My mother talked about the neighbor's barking dog. James complained about the price of gas. My father asked me to look at the back steps before I left, said they were starting to rot. I said sure, but I didn't. I left early the next morning. Told them I had a change in schedule. No one walked me out. I carried my bag, metal frames and all, down the cracked steps and into the car. The engine hesitated, then caught. I didn't wait for it to warm up. At the first gas station outside of town, I stopped. Sat there in the lot with the window cracked, watching a man sweep up cigarette butts from the sidewalk. I took the metal out. The crack in the frame didn't bother me anymore. In a strange way, it felt more honest that way. When I got back to base, I didn't unpack right away. Just slid the frame into the drawer where the others were. I thought about how long I'd been waiting for them to care. For some kind of acknowledgement. For anything resembling pride. It wasn't disappointment I felt. It was clarity. Up until then, I'd believed there was some version of the story where they'd come around. Say the right thing. Show up. But standing there in the garage, watching my father toss it all away like junk, something in me settled. Not in a vengeful way. Just in a final one. I didn't bring it up again. I didn't call to follow up. I stopped checking their weather reports. Stopped reminding them about their prescriptions or power bills or the balance on their property taxes. I didn't cut them off. I just stopped anticipating the ask. The metal still sits in my drawer. Crack and all. It was never about the frame. It was about the fact that they couldn't see the value in something I'd spent my entire adult life building. And if they couldn't see that, I stopped feeling the need to explain it. I flew back a day earlier than planned. Told them I had to report in for a briefing, which wasn't true. I just couldn't sit through another dinner pretending like everything hadn't shifted. The drive to the airport was quiet. My mom didn't come. My father stood at the door and gave me a 2-finger wave. James didn't look up from his phone. When I landed, I didn't head straight to base. I went home, dropped my bag, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Didn't unpack. Didn't turn on the light. Just sat there, staring at the zipper I hadn't opened since I pulled the metal out of the trash. The next morning, I asked my CO for a meeting. Told him I had some personal admin to sort out and needed a little flexibility. He didn't ask questions. Just said, take the time you need. I ended up at the rec center. There was a retired major who volunteered there a few times a week. He'd been a mentor back when I was still junior enlisted, ran the leadership seminars, gave straight answers even when they were hard to hear. I found him in the weight room, wiping down a bench. He smiled when he saw me and said, "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." We sat outside near the track. I told him about the metal, the trash bin, the garage. He didn't interrupt. Just listened, arms crossed, eyes steady. When I finished, he nodded once and said, "Sometimes, people don't value what they didn't earn." I didn't say anything. He added, "But you don't have to keep paying their tab just because they share your last name." That line stuck with me. I thanked him, said I'd see him around, and walked back to my car. That night, I logged into the personnel portal. I'd avoided that section for years, the one labeled Family. It was buried beneath the more urgent tabs. Assignments, evaluations, leave balances. But there it was, waiting like a drawer I never opened. My parents were listed as dependents, still marked eligible for housing allowances, medical extensions, pension access in the event of my death. At one point, I must have filled that out without thinking. Or maybe I did think about it and just didn't question it. You list your parents because they're your family. Because that's what you're supposed to do. I stared at it for a while. The cursor blinking next to my father's name. Under relationship, it said parent. Under support status, it said full. I hadn't even known that was the term they used. Full. I closed the tab and sat back. My room was dark except for the light of the screen. I could still hear his voice. Maybe if you brought something useful home for once. I had spent years giving. Not just money. Time. Labor. I filed their taxes. Managed their insurance claims. Booked appointments. Made decisions. I'd handled more of their lives than they had. And still, the first thing he thought to do with my metal was throw it out. I started tracing it back when that dynamic began. It wasn't recent. It had always been there in small ways. I was 12 when my father made me call the utility company because they take women's voices more seriously. I was 16 when they handed me their medical forms and told me to figure it out. I thought it was normal. Just being responsible. But at some point, it stopped being mutual. I wasn't the daughter who helped when she could. I was the backup system. The safety net. The contingency plan. And they treated me like a system, not a person. I talked to one of my friends on base the next morning. She was a few years older, also retired. Had been through a similar thing with her sister, kept bailing her out, even after it became obvious the help wasn't appreciated. I told her what happened with the metal. She didn't gasp. Didn't say how awful it was. Just leaned back and said, "That tracks." Then she looked at me and said, "You gonna let them keep taking from you, or are you done now?" I didn't answer. But I knew the answer. That afternoon, I reopened the personnel portal. This time, I didn't just look. I started filling out the forms. Request to modify dependent status. Remove housing allowance attachment. Revoke emergency medical extension. It didn't all process right away. Some of it required follow-up calls. I scheduled an appointment with the finance office to go over the pension distribution. The sergeant behind the desk pulled up my file and asked, "Is there a reason for the changes?" I said, "They're no longer dependents." He nodded, didn't push. Just made the updates. By the end of the week, it was official. I got a confirmation email with the subject line, "Status update, dependent benefits terminated." I stared at that email longer than I should have. Not out of guilt. Just adjustment. It felt like closing a tab I'd kept open for 20 years. They didn't know yet. They'd find out eventually, probably the next time they tried to use the coverage. Or maybe when the housing stipend didn't land. I didn't plan to explain it. I'd spent enough time explaining things to people who weren't listening. I wasn't angry. I wasn't out for revenge. I just stopped pretending that being their daughter meant handing over every piece of myself. That weekend, I went through the drawer where I kept all my service awards. Took each one out. Wiped down the frames. Labeled the backs with dates and locations. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. I lined them up on the wall. Nothing showy, just a clean row, even spacing, level to the inch. For the first time in a long time, they looked like mine. Not something to be hidden. Not something I needed to justify. Just what they were, a record. Of work done. Of years spent showing up. And now, I was learning to show up for myself. The call took less than 10 minutes. I sat in my car, parked just outside the finance building. The engine was off. Window cracked. My phone balanced on my knee. When the pay office clerk picked up, I gave her my ID number, confirmed my rank, and said, I need to cancel all dependent benefits tied to my account. Medical, housing, insurance access. Everything. She paused. Said all of it. Yes. I just need to confirm this is voluntary. It is. Understood. Are you sure you want to proceed with full cancellation? You'll need to resubmit if you change your mind. There's a processing delay. I'm sure. She hesitated again, like she was waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. I'm done underwriting people who resent me, I said. She clicked her keyboard a few times. It'll be processed by the end of the week. You'll receive a confirmation email. Anything else? No. That's it. I hung up. Sat there for a while. The air was warm. Quiet. There wasn't a sense of triumph or guilt. Just stillness. 2 days later, I got the confirmation. Subject, dependent removal processed. I flagged it, saved a PDF copy for my records, and then closed my laptop. That same afternoon, the first voicemail came through. Hey, my father said. We're having some kind of issue with the health insurance portal. Your mother's specialist appointment isn't showing coverage. Can you check? No greeting. No question. Just the same tone he used when I was a teenager and forgot to bring in the mail. I didn't call back. A second voicemail came the next morning. My mother this time. We tried calling the benefits office, but they said something about the sponsor terminating access. That can't be right. There must be a mistake. Please call. Her voice had a tremble to it. Not panic, confusion. Like someone whose seatbelt had been cut. I let that one sit, too. The third came 2 days later. You need to fix this, my father said. No greeting again. No explanation. Your mother's appointment is this week. We've already waited 6 months. You can't just do something like this without warning. That was rich. Warning? I had spent over a decade giving them more than they ever asked for, without a single condition. And now I was being accused of a sneak attack, because I finally stopped. By the end of the week, they showed up. I'd just finished PT and was walking across the lot when I saw their car parked outside my building. My father was leaning against the hood. My mother sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, shoulders tight. I considered walking past, but I didn't want this to turn into something messy. So I walked over. My father stood straighter when he saw me. His face looked different, drawn, tired. He didn't look angry. He looked cornered. My mother stepped out slowly. Her eyes were glassy. Not red, not tearful. Just empty in a way I hadn't seen before. What are you doing here? I asked. We need to talk, she said. I nodded once. Not here. I walked them to the side of the building where it was shaded and quiet. No one said anything for a moment. Then my mother broke first. Why would you do this to us? I didn't respond right away. I looked at her, then him, then back at her. Because you made it clear I'm only valuable when I'm paying for something, I said. So I stopped. My father exhaled through his nose. Not quite a scoff, not quite a sigh. That's not fair. Isn't it? My mother shook her head. We're your parents. I know, I said. And I've been your backup plan for 20 years. But that doesn't mean I owe you everything I earn. It's not about money, she said. No, I replied. It's about respect. And the fact that I've never seen any of it from you unless it came with a check attached. They both went quiet. Then my father said, we thought you didn't need that kind of attention. That you were strong enough without it. That was the closest thing to an explanation I was ever going to get. I nodded. You were right. I am. Which is why I don't need this dynamic anymore. You're punishing us, he said. No. I'm setting a boundary. We stood there for another minute. My mother wiped her eye. Said, so that's it? For now, yes. They didn't argue. Didn't raise their voices. Maybe they realized I wasn't bluffing. Maybe they were too tired. They left. I watched them pull out of the lot and disappear into traffic. That evening, I got a text from James. They said you cut them off. Cold. What the hell is wrong with you? I didn't answer. The calls slowed after that. A few trickled in over the next week, but nothing urgent. No new emergencies. Just silence filling the space where the requests used to be. One of my friends on base asked how it went. I said, they got the message. She asked if I felt better. I said, I feel done. There's a difference. Better implies healing. Done is just when you stop bleeding. Word started getting around the family. A cousin called to say he'd heard I was turning my back. An uncle forwarded an email about taking care of your elders. I ignored all of it. The irony was, they never had any interest in my life until my absence affected theirs. That's how I knew the decision was the right one. I wasn't doing this to make a point. I wasn't doing it to make them hurt. I was doing it because I finally realized that the person they needed didn't exist anymore. And maybe never did. The backlash didn't take long. Word moved fast in my family, faster than facts usually did. Within a week, I got a message from my cousin Mark. It was short. Just, so you're cutting off your parents now? Harsh. I didn't respond. 2 days later, my Aunt Lisa left a voicemail. She never used to call, just commented on Facebook posts or sent the occasional forwarded email chain. This time, her voice was sharp. I don't know what they did to deserve this, she said. But family doesn't turn their back. Especially not on the people who gave them everything. I let that message sit unread in my inbox for weeks. Eventually, I deleted it without listening to the rest. But not everyone came in swinging. A few texts trickled in from people I hadn't heard from in years. Quiet notes. One from an older cousin I barely knew growing up. She wrote, I heard what happened. Just want you to know. I get it. Another from a friend of my mother's, someone who used to babysit me when I was a kid. I've seen how much you've given them. Don't let anyone rewrite that. Those messages stayed with me more than the angry ones. Because they came without agenda. Meanwhile, my parents were scrambling. I found out through a third party. One of my mother's neighbors called me by accident, thinking I still handled their business. She mentioned something about them trying to reapply for benefits. That they were on the phone all week. Confused, frustrated. Nothing was going through. I knew exactly why. Once dependents are removed from the system, everything locks. Reinstating them takes formal paperwork, interviews, justification. And even then, it doesn't undo the flags. Everything gets documented, why the change happened, who requested it, what support structures they actually have in place. They had no fallback, no savings, no backup plan. I'd spent so long absorbing the shocks in their life, they never bothered building any resilience of their own. And now the cracks were showing. Their furnace gave out again in December. I only found out because James posted something online, one of those vague sympathy-baiting updates, complaining about how people who act like family forget who raised them. He didn't mention names. He didn't have to. I didn't respond. Didn't call. Didn't send money. They'd figured it out before. Or maybe they hadn't. But it wasn't mine to carry anymore. Instead, I focused inward. Which, for someone like me, was a foreign muscle to exercise. I'd been putting off school for years. There was always a reason: workload, deployment, family obligations. But once the noise fell away, I realized there was nothing stopping me. So I enrolled in a part-time program, organizational leadership and ethics. A mix of policy, psychology, strategy. It felt strange to be in a classroom again, even virtually. But I liked the structure. The clarity. I started teaching, too. Small seminars on base for junior NCOs. Workshops on conflict resolution, chain of command integrity, mentorship. The irony didn't escape me. Here I was, lecturing about trust, about setting expectations, about clear boundaries, when I'd spent half my life abandoning those exact principles for the sake of keeping peace at home. But that's the thing about leadership. It doesn't mean you've always done it right. It just means you know when it's time to course correct. There was a moment, maybe 6 weeks into the new routine, when I sat at my desk after a class and realized I hadn't thought about them all day. Not out of anger, just absence. The weight was gone. Not because I'd pushed it off, but because I'd finally set it down. There were still occasional flare-ups. One night, my dad tried calling from a blocked number. I let it ring. The voicemail was short. "You made your point." That was it. No apology. No reflection. Just that, an acknowledgement that I'd taken something away, and that they noticed. I played it once, then deleted it. I don't know what he wanted me to do in response. Reverse it? Feel guilty? Reach out and offer a compromise? But I didn't. Because there was nothing to negotiate. I didn't make my decision to prove a point. I made it because the arrangement wasn't working anymore. And once you see that, really see it, there's no going back. The world didn't collapse without them. In fact, it got quieter. More manageable. I started spending weekends off base for the first time in years. Explored nearby towns. Learned how to cook more than just eggs and pasta. Picked up running again. At some point, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in my mother's handwriting. Inside, a note. "We didn't realize how much you were doing. Or how tired you must have been." No apology. But also no ask. I kept that one. Didn't respond. Didn't throw it away. Just put it in a drawer with the rest of my files. There's something unsettling about seeing people struggle when you know you could fix it. Especially when you've built your identity around being the one who steps in. But there's also something deeply honest about letting people sit with the consequences of how they treated you. And letting yourself off the hook for how they choose to handle it. I wasn't cold. I wasn't bitter. I was just finished. And for the first time in a long time, I knew what I wanted. Not revenge. Not reconciliation. Just peace. A year passed. Quietly. No emergencies. No last-minute requests. No guilt-laced voicemails. For the first time in decades, I had an entire calendar year where I wasn't cleaning up behind someone else's life. I finished my coursework. Taught another round of seminars. Picked up a side certification in conflict mediation. I took a trip overseas solo. Nothing extravagant. Just a place I'd always meant to visit but never carved out time for. I walked for miles. Drank good coffee. Didn't check my phone for 2 full days. When I got back, I felt like I'd been living on someone else's terms for so long, I'd forgotten what it meant to be on my own time. And then one morning, I opened my mailbox and saw it. A plain white envelope. My name written in firm, familiar handwriting. No return address. No postage stamp. It had been hand-delivered. Inside, there was a single sheet of lined paper. Nothing formal, no dear, no date. Just one sentence. "I didn't know how to be proud of you. I only knew how to need you." No name. No closing. Just that. I read it twice. Then again. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat with it. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest thing I'd gotten. And maybe, for someone like my father, that was the limit of what he could offer. I didn't respond right away. I waited. 3 days later, I wrote a message. Short. Precise. "I'm open to talking. But I'm not your retirement plan. And you will not speak to me with disrespect again." I didn't know what to expect. I figured he might push back, argue the phrasing, treat it like an attack. Instead, I got a text the next day, understood. Coffee? We met at a diner halfway between his place and base. Neutral ground. Public enough to keep things civil. I got there early, sat by the window. When he walked in, he looked older than I remembered. Thinner, too. But alert. He nodded when he saw me. No hug. No big gestures. Just sat down across from me and said, "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded. We didn't jump into anything. Talked about the food first. Then the weather. Then a little about the news. It wasn't avoidance, it was pacing. Testing the water. Eventually, he said, "Your mom's doing okay." I didn't ask how James was. Neither did he. He reached for the sugar packet, tore it slowly. "Things got tight last winter," he said. I nodded once. I heard. He didn't ask for help. Didn't explain or defend what they'd done. Just stated it like a fact. After a pause, he said, "We didn't know how to handle it. All your success. All that distance." I looked at him. "It wasn't the distance," I said. "It was the dismissal." He held my gaze for a second, then looked down at his coffee. "Yeah, we didn't get into the details. Not the trash bin. Not the voicemails. Not the years of silence packaged as survival. But there was something in his face, something I hadn't seen before. Not shame. Not regret. Just recognition. He didn't ask for the benefits back. Didn't even mention them. He knew the answer. Before we left, he stood up and said, "We messed up." I nodded. "Yeah." Then he said, "I'm not asking you to fix anything. I don't want the last thing between us to be silence." We walked out together. No handshake. No long goodbye. He got in his car and drove off. I stood in the lot for a minute. Not relieved. Not sad. Just level. After that, things didn't change drastically. I didn't reinstate the benefits. I didn't start wiring money. But I started answering the phone when they called. Not every time, but enough. Sometimes it was my mom, asking about a form or a doctor's note. Sometimes it was just a check-in. Short, awkward. But she kept it light. I could tell she was trying not to tip the balance. Once, she said, "I saw a picture of you from that award thing. You looked good in the uniform." I said thank you. There was a beat of silence before she added, "We probably should have told you that sooner." I didn't fill the space. Just let it sit. That was enough. Not forgiveness. Not closure. Just a pause in the pattern. A chance to start over if we both wanted to. I kept my boundaries. I didn't visit. I didn't offer help. But I allowed the door to stay open, just a crack. On my terms. Sometimes, that's as close as you get to repair. Not a reunion. Not a redemption arc. Just the quiet decision to stop keeping score and start keeping space. Now, years later, I'm retired. The transition felt quieter than I expected. No big send-off. No parade. Just a final formation, a few handshakes, and the steady paperwork trail that comes with the end of a career. I turned in my ID, packed up my office, and walked out into civilian life with a duffel bag and a thumb drive full of certificates. I still wake up early. Still make the bed military tight. Some habits never leave you. But the pace is different now. Slower. More deliberate. I work part-time with a nonprofit that helps transitioning veterans navigate life after service. Mostly administrative support, sometimes mentorship. I don't advertise my background. If someone asks, I'll tell them. But I don't lead with it. The medals are framed, lined up on the wall in my hallway. Not in the living room. Not where guests can study them like trophies. They're just there. Where they belong. Each one marked, labeled, dated. Clean and simple. I don't look at them every day. But when I do, it's not for validation. It's for perspective. A reminder of who I've been. What I've endured. What I chose to walk away from. I still support people. But selectively now. Strategically. I vet requests. I ask questions. I don't jump in unless I understand the situation and unless the support actually makes sense. And I no longer feel guilt when the answer is no. That's what clarity does. It strips away the impulse to rescue everyone just because you can. My parents still live in the same house. The roof leaks occasionally. The furnace acts up in the winter. But they've figured out how to get by. Barely. I don't know the details anymore. I don't ask, and they don't volunteer. Every now and then, I'll get a call. Not often. Usually around birthdays, or when someone in the family passes and the group text revives for a week. When we talk, it's surface level. Civil, measured. There's no resentment anymore, but there's no closeness either. Just a kind of mutual understanding. I have my life. They have theirs. And that's enough. People ask sometimes if I ever forgave them. The truth is, I stopped needing to. Forgiveness implies you're waiting for someone to admit what they did. I wasn't waiting. I made peace without their participation. That's not weakness. That's survival. I learned that not everyone will value what you've earned, especially if they believe they're owed a share of it. The more you give without boundaries, the more invisible you become. Not because you're not doing enough, but because the people around you stop recognizing that it's effort at all. It becomes default. expected, unseen. But boundaries are the real service. Not just to others, but to yourself. People like to say that loyalty is about never walking away. I disagree. Loyalty is about showing up with integrity. And if the relationship doesn't allow you to show up as a full person, if you're only welcome when you're useful, then stepping back isn't betrayal. It's self-respect. That's the lesson I wish someone had taught me earlier. That you can love people and still deny them access. That you can be generous without being exploited. That being dependable doesn't mean being disposable. And sometimes the strongest move you'll ever make is to stop showing up for people who only see you as a paycheck. I think about that day in the garage sometimes. The bin. The frame. The cracked corner. I used to replay it like a bad movie, trying to find the moment I could have spoken up, explained, defended myself. Now I just see it for what it was, a turning point. A clean break in the story. There's no epilogue where they apologize on cue and everything resets. There's no holiday dinner where we laugh and pretend none of it happened. But there is a version of this life where I stand upright. Where I live unburdened. Where I know that my value isn't tied to how much I give, but to how honestly I live. And that version is enough for me. A few weeks ago, I ran into a former colleague at a conference. He asked how things turned out with my family. I told him, they're still there. I just don't carry them anymore. He nodded and said, that sounds healthier. It is. The house is quiet now. No demands coming in. No late night calls asking for bailouts. I read more. Cook more. Sometimes I drive out to the lake and just sit with a coffee and let time pass. I used to think peace was the absence of conflict. Now I know better. Peace is the absence of imbalance. It's walking through your own front door and knowing every item in your life has been chosen, not inherited, not imposed. Chosen. Even the silence. Especially the silence. That's what legacy really means to me now. Not just the medals, or the titles, or the money saved. But the decisions that protect your future. The lines you draw that say, this is where I stop performing and start existing. Because at the end of the day, respect isn't what you demand from others. It's what you give to yourself when you stop asking for permission. If you've ever had to choose peace over obligation, especially with family, you know it's not easy, but sometimes it's necessary. Have you ever been treated like a wallet instead of a person? Or had to cut someone off just to protect your sanity? Drop your story in the comments, I want to hear it. And if you found this relatable, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, respect, and walking away when it counts.